Welcome to the Women Tech Council Student Innovator Mentorship Podcast Series. I'm Sarah Jones.
And I'm Sydney Tetro, and we are co-hosts of this show.
This show provides conversations with women mentors who came through STEM pathways and launched successful STEM careers. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome Kira Booth to our Mentor Podcast Series. Kira, welcome.
Hi.
So, Kira, introduce yourself for everyone.
So, like she said, my name is Kira. I work at Qualtrics as a software engineering lead for 3 different teams. I went to school at the University of Utah and graduated with a degree in computer science.
Wonderful. So, tell us about your career highlight, like the thing that stands out the most so far to you.
Yes, so it's a very clear moment for me. I was working on this new team for text analytics, and they brought me in basically to help me rapidly build out their user interface because we had like 3 PhDs who were working on building out these custom algorithms, and they needed somebody with UI experience to build an entire UI front to back in about a month. And so they brought me onto the team, and we shipped the product, we demoed it, it was great. And then afterwards, the team had kind of like grown. We were at 10 people, which is pretty big for a Scrum team. And at that point, my then boss's boss took me for a one-on-one, and we were walking around the gardens talking, and he was like, Kira, I want you to take the exports product and run your own team. Basically, we were going to split the team in half one way or the other, and I could have run the front-end portion that I was already familiar with, or I could have run the back-end exporting functionality. And he was like, I'm going to tell you right now, exports is going to be way harder. It's going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done, but I think you should take it. I'm not telling you what to do, but I think you would do really well in it. And I'm the kind of person where you can't challenge me and say something's going to be really hard and then have me be like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So I ended up taking the exports team, and it was a bit of an operational nightmare at the time that I took the team. There was not good monitoring or alerting, and that's my favorite thing in the world is good operations. Knowing when my stuff is broken and when the customers are in pain, but never having somebody woken up if my customers aren't in pain. And we had to understand these 3 legacy code bases that were millions of lines of code on one of them, and make sure that we had all the tooling and alerting and monitoring in place, and also just understand what they were doing so that we could support them. And it was a long, arduous road, and I learned a whole bunch of new technologies that I had not known before, and learned how to really refine my operations. And it's been a year and a half now since I took that team, and it's like my baby, and I love that team, and I think that it's really pushed me to succeed. And now, since that time, my boss who asked me to take exports has given me 2 other teams, and I don't think if I had taken the easy route, as he put it, that I would be in the same place that I was today.
That is such a great example of kind of taking those challenges and seeing them as really great growing experiences. I don't know if you were exactly articulating it to yourself that way at the time, but I mean, you did talk about that that path was full of challenges. Is there one particular challenge that comes to mind that just taught you a ton? Love to hear what you have to say around the role of failure and how that helped you.
Yes. So there have been, I've encountered 2 different types of challenges since becoming a team lead, and I'll touch on both of them a little bit briefly because I think that they both have value, especially depending on which path you want to take in your career. So first of all is inheriting a large, overcomplicated workflow. Basically, one of our exporters had been over-engineered, and the people who built it initially many years ago decided that they were going to do MapReduce because they thought that it was a long-running problem, so doing MapReduce will make it faster. But they didn't truly do MapReduce, and it wasn't actually a problem that required MapReduce. So now we have this overly complicated system in order to support this MapReduce approach, when really we ended up profiling the code like 8-9 months in, because we were having a lot of alerts triggering, like there were a lot of failures going on. And I think it was around 75% of the time was spent just parsing numbers. And it took me way too long to sit down and really dig in to figure out what was going on in those code bases. We were kind of just band-aiding it, right? Like one thing would break and we would make a small improvement so that we could survive another 2 weeks. And if we had just put aside and like thought a little bit more about paying down that technical debt early and upfront, I think we would have gotten a lot more sleep, that's for sure, over the following months. And so just like profiling your code early and kind of maybe planning technical debt stuff into your day-to-day so that you are regularly revisiting old code and be like, can we change this? Is there low-hanging fruit to make this better? That's something I wish that I had learned early on. And now I do something on my teams called Tech Debt Mondays, where every Monday we do technical debt stuff. So that can mean better alerting, better logging, that one bug that's been annoying you but isn't high priority, refactoring. That's the sort of stuff that I try to give my teams opportunities to do on Monday, which is something that I had learned from the pain of not paying down technical debt early. The other kind of challenge that I have had is leading people who are older than you. So it's more of a management challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
So I have 8 direct reports right now across my 3 teams, and then myself makes 9. So we have 3 teams of 3. And let me see, how many? I have like 3 people on my team that are younger than me, and some of them only by a couple months, and all the rest of them are older than me, which is a little bit intimidating at first. And I also have some people who are smarter than me, and my first teammate is a genius, and I knew this going in, and I was so terrified to try to lead him because I thought that he was not going to respect me as a leader because I wasn't as good at solving some of these problems as he was. But then Labor Day weekend of 2016, I was driving to Las Vegas to enjoy my Labor Day weekend with my family, and we had an incident that just like blew up, and it required customer communication and like escalation to other teams and trying to think of what we would call scrappy ways of making it work for the weekend so that this customer could export all their data. And he just did not know how to do that sort of communication. But I was doing it from my phone on the road and like coaching other teammates on how we can maybe implement solutions that will allow them to do this export, and then we can do a like more permanent refactor after. And it was in that moment that I was like, wait, I have a different set of skills that he doesn't have. And even though he's older and in several ways technically better than I am, I have all of these other skills that together we make a really good team. And so trying to identify your strengths and like being comfortable with the fact that not every area is going to be your strongest area is also something that I constantly have to remind myself.
I love that story. I'm going to make a big assumption here. I'm guessing you're one of the few women engineers at your company.
Yeah, I think that we are 12% of our engineering team is female. So
okay, a little bit lower than average across the nation, and you're relatively young and already leading. So I'm wondering what advice you would give to our women students who are listening. How do you get heard? How do you, when you see these things that could be done better, right? you said Tech Debt Monday has been this really amazing thing so that people aren't procrastinating. I mean, everybody hates optimization and all of, and so that's why they procrastinate it. And that's why it never gets done.
Yeah, until it's a big problem.
Exactly. And you thought about a way of doing it first of the week before everybody's been mired down. We're just going to do it, spend a day to focus on it. Okay, the rest of the week you get to do whatever you want to do. So how do you get heard? You've got a great mind. You have these great ways of thinking through these problems. And we know that it's been historically a challenge for women in engineering to be visible and to have their ideas heard and implemented, and then to be also seen as leaders. So what are some of your tips that you have that have worked for you?
One of the first things that I did at Qualtrics was I went and kind of found myself an unofficial mentor in terms of leadership. And I found two who were at the director level, basically. But we have a very open culture at Qualtrics, and it's very much a meritocracy. So basically I started getting my feet wet with that, in that I saw that our on-call process was broken after my first experience on call, and it was horrible. And so I reached out to the person who kind of ran the team who was in charge of some of that and said, I want to make these changes and I think it'll be better, and this is why. And he was like, okay, I'm not going to do it, but you can do it. And so then I worked with one other engineer, and we kind of overhauled the on-call process, and that was in my first 9 months. And I think that kind of got me some level of recognition across engineering so that people knew who I was, and it gave me a little bit of respect because I made people's lives easier when they went home and when they were on call. But if I didn't have that, I still regularly will send docs or preview emails if it's an important email, and I'll send it to one of my mentors and be like, can you give this a once over before I send it? Oftentimes they will call me out on using things like I think, or maybe we should, some of that uncertain language. And just having somebody to collaborate with, I think, has been extremely useful.
Can I ask really quickly, are your Informa mentors, are they male or female?
So they are both male. There's another woman who has recently joined the engineering team who is a higher level, and she and I collaborate around several other projects, and I ask her for advice on certain things. But these two mentors that I started with were male. And to some degree, I think that it has both advantages and disadvantages. I think they're a little more aware of when my language feels off. When I'm using that very passive language, they might be able to call it out easier. Yeah. I don't know if that's true. It probably varies from person to person. But
how did you get them to really support you at the level that you wanted?
That's a good question. I nagged them a lot. I just went over to their desks, and I've always been very open and candid. So when one of them is now my boss, he was not my boss when I started, but I kind of had him as a mentor anyway. In our one-on-ones, I would just sometimes let it all out, and I will just be very open with him. And I think that style, it's also how I lead my teams. I'm a little bit more frank than I was in college, and it has kind of fostered this openness on my teams and the sense of open communication, where we have this book that is prerequisite reading at Qualtrics by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And her theory is that there's these 4 quadrants, right? Where you are, if you have trust and you are very open, then that's the best quadrant to be in. If you are kind of sugarcoating it and have trust, then you're just blindly leading the person down the wrong path. If they don't trust you and you're lying to them, then that's let's see, I think that there's cruel empathy where you're being nice, but you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you're kind of sugarcoating it. And then there's being nice and straight up lying to them. And then there's being honest, but not being nice about it. And without that trust, Kim Scott likes to say that just makes you an asshole. And so like I've found my way into the quadrant where we just have open and honest communication. And I think that that has made it easier to talk about what we might call critical conversations, right? Like where I have talked about diversity or why I think that somebody who is 10 years older than me on my team doesn't show me the kind of respect that I want, and how I can try to employ methods in my process to help with that. I'm very much about adding things to processes, because if I don't have a reminder for it, I'm going to forget to do it.
That's great. Okay, one last question to wrap up our podcast. What advice would you give to our STEM students, our women STEM students who are really trying hard to keep more of them in STEM? So what would be that one piece of advice that you would leave them with?
I think that my advice would be just to be authentically yourself. And not only does that make your work life easier, if I felt like I had to put on a facade every time I went to work, I would be miserable and I wouldn't enjoy spending my time there. I actually like going to work and hanging out with my coworkers because I get to just be me. But that also means, be honest with yourself about what it is that you want, right? Don't feel like there are certain expectations for you to do one thing or another. I've found, strangely, a lot with a lot of new graduates, oftentimes more vocally expressed with women when I'm interviewing. They are like, I'm not a front-end engineer, I'm a back-end engineer, which is fine, but it's how insistent they are on that. And I think it's because there's a bit of a stigmatism in a way that front-end engineers are not as worthy or respectable. They're not solving hard problems like back-end engineers are, which is just not true. And I don't want to discourage anybody from doing front-end or back-end or full stack. Most of my teams are full stack and they get to do both. But I think that if you are really honest with yourself about what your strengths are and what you enjoy doing, it's going to make you that much better and more engaged in your career. Like if you think I have to do this in order to gain the respect of my peers, but you hate it, you're going to burn out really fast. If you find the thing that you love and you excel at it, I guarantee you will be respected.
That's great advice. Kira, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. Hope everybody enjoyed hearing how she's been able to rise very quickly as an engineer into leadership, and we've loved having you on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Women Tech Council Student Innovators Mentorship podcast series. Go to www.womentechcouncil.org for more info and subscribe to our iTunes channel for access to our ongoing series.